I love cookies. I love cookies. I love cookies. I love cookies.
Welcome to Cookies, the world's most influential basketball podcast. I am Ben Dietrich. Jordan Rodelli remains on vacation, and Andrew Kuo still won't take a day off. Mr. Andrew Kuo, how are you, dude?
Feeling very energetic, man. It's an emergency pod. Great news today. Not only are we nearing stage 5, but the Knicks made some headlines, man.
The New York Knickerbockers?
The New York basketball team. And, you know, for our Patreon listeners, this is going to hit right as this news breaks.
And it is a huge advantage when you are a beloved Patreon subscriber because you get instant access to emergency pods, which otherwise you'd be waiting several days to hear, which kind of defeats the whole purpose of an emergency pod.
And if you were eyeing some merch, like this, the Sixers are back, and you wanted to grab a Bullies, the savings pay for the subscription. So
You're technically making money.
yeah.
The more Bullies products you buy on sale, the richer you get.
The super sale, the super Patreon membership sale.
Yes, that's true. So Patreon members get an additional discount on top of the already steep savings that everyone is entitled to. But yeah, we do have some stuff on a newly created sale page on cookieshoops.com. A lot of the Bullies merch is up there, some of our more popular items ever. And let's see, some uniforms, some shorts, some tie-dyes from the Cookies Hoops Classic.
A poster that has been hand screen printed just for
limited,
Sixers fans.
Am I right that is limited edition?
Yo, you can't let everyone get their hands on this poster. You got to keep it to the heads, man.
It is a technically finite number of available screen prints.
It's like those Virgil dunks that just went online today. Those lasted a few seconds. These posters lasted a little while longer, but not that much longer.
It's probably more of those posters than those dunks.
You think so?
I don't know. Anyway, enough of this shilling. Just an embarrassing beginning to the show overall, and one that should be joyous. The Knicks got their man.
They did. Should we discuss this now, or should we save it?
Let's savor the moment. Talk about it a little bit.
Okay.
Like half an hour or something.
Yeah, we'll wait to crescendo that shit.
Yeah. Let's pick up some steam before we start unloading the hot takes.
Yeah, it's like, you don't want to see Darth Vader fight Luke Skywalker in the beginning of the movie. What else has been going on, man?
Who, Thibs the mini boss, or is he the final boss for this episode?
Stay tuned to find out.
What else has been going on? Well, beyond the NBA restarting, the hoops are back up here in New York City.
Yeah, you balled today, right? Like you dusted off that outdoor round ball and went. I can't believe I called it round ball. That's disgraceful. And you got some shots up, man.
Yeah, I didn't see any of the other local cagers around, to throw the old round ball through the peach basket. Walking peach basket over here.
Did you meet them at the rim?
No, I was the only person foolish enough to shoot around in 90 degrees on a sun-baked court.
Yo, it's very hot out today in New York City. It is humid. It's soupy.
It was a little hot for outdoor summer hoops here in New York City.
But it's a small price to play because you miss that feel, right? Like when's the last time you can get like your basketball energy back?
I started wilting after a little while. I felt a bit like, Hillary Clinton leaving a, 9/11 ceremony.
Oh, wow.
Legs sort of gave out on me a bit.
Shots fired. You felt like a leprechaun who couldn't find the pot of gold.
I did really find my range, though, in the one area of the court that had shade. So I ended up chucking almost all of my attempts as NBA range threes solely because there's a tree there. And I did hit the tree several times. But I'm looking forward to that shot becoming part of my arsenal. Above the break, NBA 3 from beneath a tree.
Maybe you didn't want it enough that day.
I don't think I did. But, the one thing is, I still haven't figured out if I'm like down to play basketball with other people. I haven't really sorted that out yet. That hasn't been the case. I've just gone a couple times and shot around.
Yeah.
I'm not entirely comfortable with it, but people are playing games. Like, it's happening.
Oh, yeah, it's happening near where I live, too. And, I've been lying to my friends, like, for the last month who are like, yo, let's get a drink. I'm like, oh, I can't. I'm too busy. I just don't feel safe. So now I'm just telling friends, it's like, I'm going to wait a little while before we go out and have, like, a beer.
Yeah, I don't feel
I know.
that way at all. But as far as basketball courts go,
even outside?
I mean, I think I would play basketball. It's more like, can you stay away from people on the court? Like,
if if 3 people rolled up to you and were like, do you want to do 2-on-2, would you do it?
Yeah, I think I'm down. Mm-hmm. Just because, like, I don't think you're spending that much time. I mean, I think it depends on how bad your defense is. If you're willing to surrender shots and you're moving around on the court, I just don't feel like you're taking, like, lots and lots of, like, COVID blasts. And you're outdoors. But I don't know.
Does dishonest defense pay here?
I mean, I don't think they would have put the rims back up if it was, like, a dire threat.
Oh, they don't know shit. Come on.
I mean, that's true, too, but, like, they did put them back up.
Yeah, sure. I think, whatever. I think it's good. I was walking through Brooklyn last week, and there was many people playing games. I saw a big 5-on-5 situation with people waiting to check in. It's back.
I mean, my thing is that, not specifically talking about you, it may apply, but I think it's going to take different amounts of time for people to resume some sense of normalcy. That's just how it's going to work,
Maybe years.
But for sure, and we've said this repeatedly, it's an accelerant. If people are a little bit leery about stuff, it's going to take them a really long time. They might never, ever be comfortable again in a crowded bar. It just might not happen.
It's funny how, like, baseball started and it works. Like, they pump sound in. Some stadiums have cardboard cutouts that are really cool. It works. It's fine. The exhibition NBA games look okay. Erykah Badu is doing concerts from her living room, bedroom, and I think, like, it is an accelerant in one way, but it is not in another. Like, I tried to watch a 2K basketball league today. I'm like, oh, gaming isn't the future. Like, that has not accelerated.
No, definitely not.
And I thought that was going to really take hold, and, like, however many examples of it, COVID being an accelerant, there are examples where it doesn't quite work out that way, and I think we're getting a little of everything. And I'm really excited for this basketball thing to start. I think it's still a terrible idea, as players have to leave the bubble. Like, Austin Rivers left the bubble; he's coming back. I think people are entering in baseball. Like, the star player from the Nationals, No Sinbin, has contracted COVID and has to go through that procedure. I think he's going to be okay, but, like, maybe it's weird. I don't think we're ready for this, but Fauci threw out the first pitch. He's an optimist, and like, we have to try something. The consequences are what they are. So baseball's working, and let's see if we can, like, pretend like this is getting better, which it's not.
Well, it depends on where you are, because it's way, way, way better in New York, and that's kind of what I'm saying. Like, it's way better, and that doesn't.
In Florida, it's terrible, right?
Yeah, so exactly. So I'm not really an optimist here. I'm just saying, I care about the numbers. Here's what they are.
Yeah, I mean, we can't all be like Taylor Swift going into the woods and recording masterpiece albums.
I saw it. The only thing I've not listened to it, and I want your review on it. It just reminded me of Justin Timberlake's foray into, cottagecore, man of the woods a few years ago.
Donald Trump Jr. going into the chopping down trees, putting on a lumberjack kit, posing for the New York Times. I mean, this is a tradition, right? Like going to the woods, going to the beach. There's not that many places people can go, like in a hypothetical sense. It's just like, oh, I did some deep thinking in my apartment. I'm like, well, that's not quite a story. Like, how about the woods? I'm like, okay, now we're cooking,
It's like when you think of ideas for, I don't know, a TV show or a book. You're like, well, how many settings are there? And you're like, Breaking Bad. Oh, you guys rocked it. You got the Southwest. Good one. Now no one can do a Southwest show for a decade.
Yeah.
Like Sopranos, Jersey crushed it. Italian Jersey life, off limits for eternity, unless it's like Real Housewives.
Right. Like, can anyone do another Baltimore procedural or like a crime show about, the journalist covering the drug trafficking in Baltimore, Port City?
Yeah, it's just off limits.
Yeah.
Which is amazing, though, because Homicide did it really well.
Yeah.
And then The Wire came back and did it better. So maybe it's possible you can turn a Batman into a Robin.
I want every single musician, whether I like them or not, to do an album from the woods. I think that is always a promising thing. And Taylor Swift recruited I think, in my opinion, the most influential artist of our generation, aside from Young Thug, which is Bon Iver. And like he kind of reintroduced the idea of going into the woods by recording his album there. And the legend says, the myth goes, he had mono and brought a 4-track into his cabin, which is kind of loose. It turns out he wrote some of it when he was sick and wrote some of it. He had the songs. He was in a band already. It kind of all came together, but it was a good story. And to me, he's just phenomenal. I love his music, and I love the influence he's had on like rap music, oddly. And he kind of lent a hand to Taylor Swift's album with one song, and the National was kind of the guitarist from the National helped write a lot of other songs with Jack Antonoff and stuff. It's an awesome record. I was worried that it would be, I was hoping it would be a really kind of heartbreaking, like self-reflective album by Taylor Swift, who I'm a huge fan of going into it. But it was kind of delightfully more Taylor Swift than I thought it would be. She's still angry, maybe even a little bitter. She wants to set the record straight about a couple of things, about a couple of gossip stories. And it just kind of works, It made me realize what makes her truly interesting is her songwriting point of view, even when she's in the context where you expect something else.
So with Bon Iver and you said the guitarist from the National, is this an indie rock album in the sense of
sonically?
Sonically, yeah. And just sort of that genre that kind of disappeared over the last decade.
It is and isn't. It has a bigness to it. It's bigly. It's a pop record for sure. It has none of the trappings of like Beck going into the woods to record One Foot in the Grave. It has the production value of Odelay or Mutations. What I thought was interesting was I kind of like got defund Wist, but I got wistful for all the great electronic music that came out like in the mid-aughts, early teens, and to see this kind of technology bubble up again in like the Haim record and the Taylor Swift record really subtly, because Bon Iver and the National kind of mess around with that stuff too, is a real treat, because I miss those sounds and I thought it was going to become a thing, and maybe it's just like an assist to another thing. It's kind of awesome.
Are you speaking more about like Panda Bear, Animal Collective style stuff, or are you talking about the dancey kind?
I'm talking about like
MGMT or I don't know, not like the Bravery, but that like stuff that got played at like the motherfucker parties.
I'm not talking about that stuff so much. I'm talking about like the R&S record stuff, like early James Blake, Machine Drum, Pearson Sound, Ramadan Man, all these like Jamie XX I think is like the most successful version of that, and maybe even the best version of that. That kind of stuff coming from the UK that I thought had a moment. You know, a lot of the PS1 parties, you'd see a lot of those DJs, and it was a thing for a second. And
were you a beach house guy?
A little, not quite like used most successfully in House of Balloons, right? Not
I felt
quite.
like that era when you would beach house in Phoenix, those were like the ones that like crossed over and were like huge.
Beach House was okay. I mean, Phoenix Phoenix to me was kind of a retro act. Maybe what I'm thinking about is like when Purity Ring tried their hand at it. Like they tried to become pop, and that was like the reverberations of the Postal Service. That's kind of what I'm talking about. Like this MIDI songwriting that was done on a laptop that kind of GarageBand made easier, and then people got into the software, and it kind of the tools influenced the way people heard sounds. And you know, Purity Ring had a moment for sure, but it didn't really hit. And Jamie XX had his moment, but it didn't quite hit in the US big. But to hear little hints of it in like a Taylor Swift record that sold over 1 million copies in one day is awesome.
Your list remains undefunded.
It's undefunded. Well, man, it's like time goes so fast, and I just like all these jams. I'm still waiting for like drum and bass to be the thing, and I'm like, oh, that was TJ Buchum came out a long time ago, man.
Why is Taylor Swift still intractably tied to Kanye West? It doesn't even track. It's just based on that award show confrontation, and it's still going on?
It's legit. He called her out. She responded, and he called her out on a song. I made that be famous, right? So there was that kind of ongoing pushing towards this story, and she kind of maybe hinted at him in a couple of songs. Like, it's legit. It's unfortunate that they're tied together, but it's not boring. Like, I think we understand that they're both like behemoths, right? Like, neither one of them is giving ground on the other.
That's true. I found Kanye's latest meltdown. We spoke about Kanye's sort of tantrums, I think, last episode. But since then, he went even more bonkers. And I'm using that in a casual way. Like, not like talking about his mental state, but what he did. Like, you know, like he was out there like wiling on
Sure.
Twitter. And we've talked about this response before, where you have people celebrating it, you have people publicly mourning, and, you know, wow, this guy needs to get help. We gotta help him. Someone needs to step in and take away his phone. This like grieving for the mental illness that is potentially on display. I feel like any response is kind of fine. Well, yeah, you want to respond and be like, oh wow, this is funny. You want to be sad. I think all that's okay. You know, Kanye's putting that out, and I don't want to judge how people respond to it.
Yeah, it's always where people come from, the starting point, you know? Like, you have your response to Kanye before he does something, and when he does something, you got it in the chamber. I don't think anyone changes their mind reading Kanye tweets, you know what I mean? It's like, oh, I went into it not really caring about mental illness, but I came out of it caring about mental illness. It's not that kind of conversation. And this is kind of relevant, and you made a good pun, like wiling out. Like Wiley, the legendary UK grime artist, kind of went off on Twitter in a way that reminded me of Kanye. And they were going through episodes, it felt like. And we all go through them big and small, but these guys seem to be going through them in a way that I personally am not equipped to like discuss or talk about. I am only equipped to be like, oh, well, I love these guys' music. I certainly don't agree with Wiley, what Wiley was tweeting about. I thought that was not okay. But, you know, when Kanye talks about his relationship and gossip and the media, like, these are all tropes that he is obsessed with. And man, Like I said it last pod, it never looks like what you want it to look like. Mental people who are mentally ill don't apologize to you and tell you you're right. They fight with you and tell you you're wrong, and that's really tough.
At the same time, I do think that reading into someone's mental state by what they tweet and what they say is a little bit of a dicey proposition. Because these always seem to coincide with Kanye putting out music. That he goes into Twitter and talks all types of reckless shit right when he has albums coming out.
Ooh, are you claiming a conspiracy?
No, but it has happened over and over and over. That he gets really active on social media at times when he's about to promote and release tunes. I don't think he's using this idea that he has mental illness as a promotional tool, but it happens a lot.
It only happens because he's forced to do it then, right? Like, if he's going to become public with a thought of his, an album, now he's public again.
I think that's true. I would agree with you that that is the relationship, that he's putting something out and it's coming to the public and he's creating it and he's maybe antsy about how it will be received. He wants people to think about it and know about it. And when he's in that situation, he's also venting publicly. That makes total sense. I agree. But I'm also like, do we know what his mental state is if he's complaining about stuff via Twitter? Is he serious? Is he a threat to himself? Is he just taking the piss? Is he like mildly upset or is he really angry? I think we read a lot into it without necessarily knowing the whole intent, but also the tone. You know, is him going on a Twitter rampage, is he just drunk? You know, did he just like down a bunch of vodka and he's like, I'm about to go off? And we're like, wow, he's having a meltdown in real time. We're watching this. Like, or is he just talking shit? I don't know.
I think with Kanye we do know because he has told us he's having a meltdown and he's bipolar, and then his wife is like he's having a meltdown and he's bipolar. You know, like that's one thing we don't have to guess about with Kanye, because Kim Kardashian was like, guys, he's told you he's bipolar. He's being bipolar. This is really tough. Like explicitly, you know, and it's like, well, is he just going off? And it's like, no, he has made albums about this thing and it's happening again, you know.
I guess this kind of goes into things you've said before, is like, is the entirety of a person what they put on Twitter? That's kind of where I'm going with that. I'm not saying he doesn't have these issues and these aren't tied to them. It's more like we don't know like the breadth of it. We don't know what's the phrase I'm looking for? We don't know how grave this situation is.
Yeah.
Like, is it just him talking shit on Twitter, or is he potentially going to harm himself? Like, there's such a spectrum, and I think that a lot of the time people are like, this is scary. Like, maybe it's not though. I don't know. I'm pleading ignorance. I don't really care about Kanye in terms of what he's doing online, and I don't really care about his music at this point. I don't care about his politics, so maybe I'm approaching it in a different way. I don't find him as compelling as I once did. Yeah,
that's been a common take, and I think we're being kind, as well, I say we, like the Twitter community that I see is being kind about Kanye this time, I think, to a farther degree. And you know, but the people who aren't are like, why do we care about this guy? Why do we keep on talking about him? And I'm like, well, the answer is clear, because he's a genius, right? And like, he has not made a heavy jam since like My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, but he has become one of the most important fashion designers of the last 10 years. And that's kind of replaced his agency that maybe his music has surrendered. And people care very much about his shoes, his clothes, his shows. And I'm like, he is somebody that is hard to ignore because he is well loved and respected.
Yeah, I'm not even suggesting that we ignore him. I'm saying personally, I sort of do. I'm not saying that is the best approach. I just think people can take from it whatever they want in the same way you can almost take whatever you want from his music or a line he has on a song.
Yeah.
Sort of like, it kind of falls under the umbrella of content.
Yeah. I got yelled at even by our good friend Nikki on Twitter because, unbeknownst to me, Adam Sandler's on-screen wife in Uncut Gems is like a very accomplished, famous performer in her own right. She's the voice of Elsa. She's been on Rent. She has awards. I had no idea, and I just found out because she was in like a Geico ad or something. I'm like, oh, this person's major, and everyone's like, where have you been? I'm like, I don't listen to Rent or watch Frozen. Like, that is totally something that is not a part of my life. So there would be no way for me to know this information. It's like, but she had a moment on the Oscars where someone mispronounced her name. I'm like, I would not have retained that information because I don't know who that person is.
And to me, it's like that with even other sports.
Yeah, for sure.
Like this guy on the Washington Nationals got COVID, and
Juan
he's a
Soto.
superstar, and I don't know who he is.
Yeah, totally. And and how weird would it be for me to be like, no, I people were teasing me on Twitter, but if I was like, in a joking way, but if I was like, Ben, he won the World Series last year, he carried the entire team, where have you been? You'd be like, I just don't care about baseball. Like, he did carry the Nationals to a title, and totally, right? Like, I don't watch Rent, and like, I have opted in to Kanye West. I care very much about him, but yeah, I've opted out of Donald Trump gossip. I only pay attention to jokes and policy. If he is like saying something stupid, I just opted out. I'm just like, I can't do anything with this.
That makes sense. And with Kanye, I feel like I probably opted out when his music started declining. This is the Luger theory that we always describe.
Mm-hmm.
I stopped anticipating his music. I stopped getting excited about the release of a Kanye album. And he was one of those artists who had a stretch of not only fantastic work, but also being the rare artist who you wanted to hear what he said. That he had stuff to talk about because he was frank about his life. And even that line you mentioned about Taylor Swift, he was one of the few guys who would go out and say things like that. There was an element of outrageousness and a lack of filter that may be tied to these other issues that we've been describing. But Kanye was a must listen for a while. And then he, in my opinion, became less of one. I did not love anything he did with Nas or Kid Cudi or even Pusha, even though I like Pusha. I think he made fairly bland choices in terms of who he decided to produce for. And he kind of put himself into a box musically as being kind of boomery.
Maybe. Yeah. It's interesting because the Thursday night at midnight when Taylor Swift's album dropped, Donda was also supposed to drop. It was promised. And it didn't. It's pretty predictable that Kanye would have a bunch of false starts with any project because that's what he does. But it was trending. Everyone was like, where's Donda? So he is still relevant, but I agree with you. Like, he has not put out a burner of an album since My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. But somehow he's still, like, I'm interested. And to have that interest by a lot of people, just, outside of Twitter even, people are curious about him, is like, you cannot even buy that. Taylor Swift still has that, like, Haim put out a really great record, I thought, but they don't have that heat. And like, certain artists do, and I just relish it because eventually when it goes away, it's just like, well, we don't have this thing anymore,
Does this apply to the god Regis Philbin? Rest in peace, King Regis, your Regency.
Yo, man, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire was a phenomenon. Remember that? It must be 20 years at this point. But
I mean, that was absolutely an iconic game show. I think it's still on.
Yeah.
He didn't host it though, right?
No, but he was like the one, and then I think he stepped back pretty quick. I believe it was someone from like maybe Joy from The View. There's been many, I want to say, but I stopped watching.
It was you described it correctly as a cultural phenomenon when it came out. I mean, I feel like I watched it every day.
Yeah. And talk about boomer, like even at the time that was hot. I was like, didn't this happen in the 40s? Like big game shows? Like didn't I watch a movie called Quiz Show about this with a Fiennes brother? Like we're still doing this? And then I watch one of those episodes, I'm like, "Oh yeah, I could watch this forever. This is exciting stuff, man."
That one had the tantalizing element of
I like that word.
people fucking up a really easy answer and looking foolish. That was the underlying part of it, was that a lot of those people on the show you could do better than, but often there'd be like that joke answer in there and someone would go for it. There was always the aspect of potential humiliation inherent in that show.
My friend was a contestant on there, and she's kind of brilliant. She went to Harvard. She knows a ton of stuff. She knows about a lot of industries. And she went on there being like, I'm going to crush this thing. And she went in with a lot of gusto, and she got bounced in the second question, and she just had a brain fart. And I forget what the question was, but she was like, when you're there, it's like, this is what athletes always say, right? I guess it was crunch time, but she didn't have those clutch genes, but she was like, oh, your brain changes when the lights go on. And I wasn't accessing the same kind of thing, but she just missed the question. It was just one thing she didn't know about, but she does not want to talk about it at all. She was like, anyone brings that up and you're dead to me.
She didn't want it enough.
Apparently, or she wanted it too much. But yeah, rest in peace to a god, man. Like he had one of the longest careers in his field of anybody.
I mean, the boomers are still running the country. We don't have anyone to vote for who's not a boomer. Like they're still an iron wrinkled fist. The smooth hand of the boomer is still on the steering wheel. But their numbers are dwindling. Regis, that's a boomer heavyweight right there.
A boomer heavyweight, and like it's a double-edged sword, because I'm a little frustrated with boomers currently, for good reason, I believe. And the one edge of the sword is like, well, eventually time will take care of this problem, but then time will take care of me too. And that is kind of harsh. And I'm not good enough to go in the woods and make a hit record about it. I just have to sit in front of my computer and be like, do I want the boomers to go away? Because that means my life is going away. I'm sorry.
Well, no, I was going to say there are people like Regis who are incredibly well known. Good Morning America. But in 20 years, people won't have a clue who he was who are younger than us. And I remember there was a story, and I can't remember if it was about Conan O'Brien or something, but it was an example of an actor who was really popular in the first half of the century, just an icon, and like no one has heard of him now. Yeah. And that kind of stuff is going to happen more and more with these things we love, because basketball has not been around that long.
1996
for sure, but even pre-NBA, it's not that long ago. The sport did not exist in even a recognizable, like even close to recognizable, until basically the 80s. But if you're including the 70s, that's not old. Basketball's been around really for like 40 some years. No one gives a fuck about the 60s. It doesn't matter. We're talking about George Mikan. We're talking about Bob Pettit. Like, no one cares about those guys. It's really like history starts in basketball with Wilt Chamberlain and Bill Russell. Mm-hmm. And as we get further away from that, there becomes more characters in this, this Greek ensemble cast. And you start having to dwindle guys out. Like Bob Pettit, I'm sorry, you're cut. You're not part of the collective memory anymore. Dave DeBusschere, great run, but like we don't remember you anymore. You're out.
Pistol Pete, get up off the ground with your horse-ass shot. You're out.
But for real, we're going to start replacing those guys. Like, hey, we think about Zion now. You know, unless you were the best or second best player in the league, we kind of got no use for you now, man. Mm-hmm. Oscar Robertson, I really respect what you did. But you're pretty close to being on the chopping block.
But even a player like Russell Westbrook is like, what the hell, man? Why has no one talked about me? Like, I am still in my prime. It's like, yeah, you're kind of yesterday's news a little bit.
I was thinking about this exact idea with Boogie Cousins, right? We loved Boogie. We talked about him. He was so relevant. Boogie Cousins, what's going to happen with him? Where's he going to end up? Oh, he's with
Max
Anthony
man.
Davis. This is interesting. He's going to be a max free agent. It's like, oh, I guess we're just never going to talk about Boogie Cousins ever again. And then in 7 years, we'll get a tweet that's like prime Boogie Cousins was, a fiasco, and it'll go viral and it'll show clips of Boogie Cousins doing cool things from like 3 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
No one talks about him. It's over.
Yeah.
It's so fast and so harsh.
I think the quickest one would be Isaiah Thomas 2, small Isaiah. He was an MVP candidate, fraudulently, I think, but like a legit star, and I loved him. And he went from being a potential Max Brinks truck signing to basically out of the league because of a hip injury and just like people adjusting to other things, like refocusing on things, right?
I mean, even Allen Iverson went from being third in the league in scoring, something like 8th or 9th in assists, top 10 in steals, to being out of the league virtually within a couple of years. But we remember him. He's still part of the conversation. Although there has been this shift to kind of view him as a cultural icon and a figure that was more about the changing league and hip-hop's influx into the NBA than him as a player. And he's even Allen Iverson, who was the baddest man on the planet for a couple years, gets sort of changed by history. And Westbrook is a great example. The guy won MVP, and now he's sort of just a dude.
Yeah, no. I mean, imagine how LeBron feels not winning MVP over Giannis Antetokounmpo twice in 2 years. I think he's like, have you guys forgotten me? And no one has forgotten about LeBron James because he is one of the greatest Americans this country has ever produced. He's still on our minds. He walks in with a WNBA sweatshirt and he's all over TV and my feed. He is a man we love to pay attention to. But you disrespect him by not giving him the MVP? I don't really... He must feel like, have you forgotten that I'm the best player on earth?
We've talked a lot about Giannis and his, scammy rebounds and his his bullshit metrics.
Again with the tzatziki?
We've talked a lot about Giannis. Especially in terms of his phony case for Defensive Player of the Year. Because he doesn't do anything.
As the interns pointed out, his teammate's a better defender than him.
Wild to see. I mean, there act like no bullshit. There is a more compelling case for Brook Lopez being Defensive Player of the Year. Even though we know that Brook Lopez isn't, there's a more compelling case.
Yeah.
They are the team that is best at protecting the paint.
Yeah.
He's the center.
Yeah.
He's second in the league in blocks. He's top 5 in shots defended. He is literally the anchor of the defense in a way that Giannis is not at all. But since we know Brook Lopez is not a great defender, we've just decided that Giannis is, because there's not plausible deniability.
Yeah.
Or there is, because there is plausible deniability.
And there's a BMM aspect here because this is not an objective award. It's a subjective award.
Right. So, yeah, I don't want to get into the Giannis bashing here. I'm just going to say it is a weird situation. This is where I'm going with this. That you have a Defensive Player of the Year who doesn't block shots, doesn't get steals, doesn't get deflections, doesn't contest a lot of shots.
Good defender. But
good defender.
You're right. Yeah.
Absolutely. It is very unique, though. We know his rebounds are schematic. He gets credit for them, but look, he is a top 15 rebounder in the league. Every team has one guy who gets most of the rebounds, and he's in the top half in the league in those guys. Mm-hmm. Respect. Mm-hmm. He gets those boards by scheme. But it is really weird to see the Bucks themselves posting about his PIPM, his defensive BPM, his win shares. We're aware of those stats. We talk about them all the time. We pay attention to them. We generally have a rough idea of how they are constructed and the biases that they hold within them. But it's very weird to see a candidate who will probably win Defensive Player of the Year being propped up almost solely by metrics and team performance on defense. I can't say we've seen that before. Is this a dangerous moment for the way that we judge basketball?
No, I think we have seen this before. Steve Nash, your other favorite dartboard guy. Those MVPs should have gone to LeBron James as well. I think what we're dealing with is story exhaustion, because optically it would look really odd to have LeBron James win MVP every year he was an active basketball player, maybe except his rookie year. But that's the truth of it, in my opinion. He is a nuclear weapon. Everyone else isn't. And I think it's just the way we decide to shift from Kanye West. The way Taylor Swift has held on is an anomaly. The way actors, like you say, kind of evaporate. Our patience dwindles for talking about the same thing. So we are creatures of action. So it can't be LeBron again. It has to be someone else. Westbrook. Well, actually, it was LeBron. It's like
Derrick Rose.
Yeah,
that was LeBron.
It was. I believe so. And Derrick Rose had a wonderful season that year. Harden should be winning, but our biases get in the way. And Giannis, I'm surprised repeated, because I thought it was boring last year. But people still love this story. They hate the Lakers. That's why. It's the BMM.
That's definitely part of it.
Yeah.
As far as Giannis's defense is concerned, really good player. But I do think the Steve Nash comparison on the defensive side is really appropriate because Coach Bud is a dorkball genius. And they have figured out a wrinkle in defensive basketball, and that is completely stymieing the lane and giving up more threes than any team in the history of the NBA. And they are doing that on purpose. And it creates these monstrous metrics for guys like Lopez and guys like Giannis. And it's been incredibly effective. And we're looking at how this has worked, and we can't say, it's Coach Bud, man. It's Coach Bud. He figured it out. He beat everyone else to the punch. He thought this through, came up with a scheme that worked, and is kicking our ass with it in the way that Mike D'Antoni did. So we had to say, it's Nash, Steve Nash. That's it. That's how this happened. It was Nash.
Yeah. Well,
Nash is good. Giannis is good. But we want to credit a player in these situations when a lot of it is getting a good fit for a system that is incredibly groundbreaking.
Yeah, and you're right to call out this groundbreaking kind of wrinkle identification that Coach Bud and D'Antoni are good at. And we got news today that there's another groundbreaking coach that just got hired with even newer ideas that will make Coach Bud seem like the boomer he is, and that's Tom Thibodeau, man.
Is this the Thibodeau conversation?
It's happening. This is it. We're living in the moment, man. Be present, Ben.
My Thibs take is initially lukewarm. I have no strong feelings about Thibs because I don't know what to pin down. We look at his history. He was there for the introduction of this Coach Bud style defense. He was on Boston as a defensive coach, and they kind of started the whole intensely pack the lane defensive strategy. And they won a title against the Lakers by doing exactly that. They beat LeBron a few times in the playoffs by doing exactly that. Put Paul Pierce, put Big Perk, put Garnett, just shove people into the lane and make other teams shoot jumpers. And that's kind of what the Bucks are doing. It's not a new idea, but he recognized that threes can be a vulnerability instead of being an asset if they are used against other teams. So Thibs was part of that in Boston, and he took that same philosophy to Chicago. But what happened was that philosophy went around the entire league, and teams adapted by putting shooters everywhere. So when Thibs was in Minnesota, their defenses were trash. They were terrible. So I don't really know what you're getting from Thibs, because I think he's probably a good coach, but what he introduced to the game and where he was influential and where he was groundbreaking in the way that Coach Bud is now has sort of been absorbed by the rest of the league in general.
I'm just proud of him. I find him inspiring because a man of his age, what is he, like in his 40s? He's probably younger than I think. But, you know, like he's letting his freak flag fly, man. His nail polish is black. He's got that King Diamond makeup. He has a top hat. He's going to be the first coach to wear a top hat during a game. I think we should respect that. He's got like a staff with a skull on top of it. Very exciting development for the New York basketball team.
All types of Nurcon jewelry on his hands. Wears a lot of purple, a lot of silver.
Why are the Knicks limited edition uniforms made out of crushed velvet?
Why does Thibs look like an out-of-work magician?
There's rabbits all over the court, guys. Wow, Mudvayne is singing the national anthem. This is a new vibe.
You know, as a die-hard Knicks enthusiast, how excited are you today?
It got me thinking about the team I love, so that's cool. There's nothing to protect here. There's nothing to invest in. So whatever. Tibbs, like you said, is a fine coach. I'm not even buying that he is responsible for all these injuries that he's attached to. You know, we blame him for overplaying players, and he does play his guys lots of minutes. And of all the stuff we know about biometrics, I think we should demand that he, you know, respect his players a little bit and like give them a breather, but some self-care. But, you know, we blame him for Joakim Noah's kind of breaking down, and Luol Deng played too many minutes, and Jimmy Butler under his watch maybe wore down a little bit. But also he made these guys stars, and like while they were playing for him, they were talked about as bona fide all-stars, and Joakim Noah even got MVP votes under Tibbs' tutelage. So what do we want? Like, I do believe we have to take care of our players and not burn them out, but also we might see Mitchell Robinson as an all-star this year.
He played guys like Andrew Wiggins a ton of minutes, and Andrew Wiggins didn't get hurt. You know, Karl Anthony Towns, maybe he did, but I think it's a fragile line between giving guys 40 minutes a game and, 33 minutes a game.
Yep, and what kind of minutes, too.
But at the same time, I would hope that there is at least some emphasis on the sports science to dictate these decisions going forward.
And the Knicks are very committed to science, so that's going to happen.
I'm just thinking Houston plays James Harden insane minutes.
Yes.
Or they did. And they are at the vanguard of paying attention to these things. So there are situations with players that teams who value health and being progressive in those areas seem to think it's okay to play a lot of minutes. And the Knicks are really, at the bleeding edge of that. Play RJ Barrett 42 minutes. Why not?
And, when I say the kind of minutes matters, because I'm still under the impression when Harden was leading, blowing away the league with minutes played, and he was being dogged, rightfully kind of maybe for not putting an effort on defense. I'm like, these two things are related. Morey is no dummy. The Houston organization knows exactly what they're doing. And I'm not saying they explicitly told him to like take plays off, but he took plays off, like, and I think that goes into like when we talked about Isaiah Thomas, when he was on the court, it exerted a lot of energy and players ran a lot to manufacture shots for that one guy. And when you're running screens, like a ladder screen system, that's different than like an isolation play, whatever. It's like a different tax that you pay on the court. So I'm not saying the Knicks are smart enough to figure this out. The Knicks aren't even smart enough to lose games. But I'm in defense of Thibodeau is what I'm saying.
I think he's probably fine. The biggest blemish on his work in Minnesota and some years in Chicago was that his teams do not shoot threes. Minnesota, they still had a good offense, but they were, I think, 26th, 30th. They were in the bottom. They were the lowest three-point shooting team in the league some years. They don't play with pace. I think his innovations from the past don't seem as relevant today as what his teams looked like in Minnesota. And weirdly, they had a good offense and a bad defense. And I think that's just based on personnel, the same way most coaches' performances.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can't take Wiggins and Karl Anthony Towns and say, okay, this is going to be a defensive dynamo. It just won't happen. But that team with an offensive superstar like Karl Anthony Towns, you can construct a good offense around that guy.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, he's ridiculously good on offense.
Yeah.
So, okay, use that guy a lot. All right.
Yo, what's up with Worldwide West? Leon Rose. Tom Thibodeau is your guy? Like, let's defend Thibodeau, but let's also call a spade a spade. What is going on, man? Like, inexplicable. Get Jason Kidd in there. That's funny, at least. Like, you have all the connections in the world, and Tom Thibodeau comes hat in hand being like, I'd like another shot in the league. And you're like, he's our guy. What?
So I have two things about this. One is that this move falls exactly into the pattern of Knicks maneuvers over the past few years, and that they want to be taken seriously so bad. They refuse to acknowledge relegation. They won't do it. They're like, no. We are a contender every year. And this probably comes from Dolan's dissatisfaction with being told that we're not going to be good this year. And he's like, nah, fuck that. Turn us into an 8th seed. Like, right away, sir. Get Thibs on the line. Get Bobby Portis in here. Taj Gibson. He can punch some faces. All right, we're going for the 8th seed, just like you wanted, Jimmy. It's every year. It's the same shit.
It's like Metallica albums, one after the other, being like, we're back to form. Saint Anger is a return to form. I'm like, oh, this is just like people losing their powers, but instead it's an organization.
Yeah, it's Nasty Nas is back, and it's like the Knicks are going to play defense. Finally, some tough guys in the Garden. We're going to be respected. And this falls 100% into that paradigm of the Knicks' desire to be viewed as a tough guy franchise, a defensive, no, it's a nasty team to play. They're going to be physical. They're going to grind you down. The Garden's going to be rocking. New Yorkers respect defense. It falls under that exact idea that has informed even last offseason. So when you look at the changes in the front office with Mills changing offices or something, like the changes in the front office are Mills changing offices. But this falls exactly under what they have been doing anyway. And I believe Leon Rose said we're going to lean heavily into veterans this offseason.
I know. It's like watching DMX perform in that Versus thing. It's like a New York curse. It's like, you know what? Hot take. DMX is better than Snoop Dogg. And I'm like, yes, I love where this is going. And after watching half an hour, you're like, no, he isn't. That is not true at all. Snoop Dogg's on another level. You can't compete with Snoop. No respect to X, who is great, but you can't listen to more than 4 X songs in a row. They're exhausting.
Disagree. Snoop, way better. Cultural ambassador.
He's a movement, Snoop.
A god. I mean, used the word phenomenon. That applies to Snoop. When he first came out, I mean, I think every single person on the planet was like, I need to watch Arsenio Hall with Snoop wearing a Toronto Maple Leafs jersey.
Doggy
Just like-
Style was one of the greatest artworks ever produced, man. That thing is perfect. Every second is good.
But man, DMX's first album is really, really, really good.
You're being a Knicks guy. This is some Knicks shit, right? Like, but Thibodeau had some good moments.
Well, it's really about the energy, right? And that DMX is 90s Knicks basketball. You're like, yeah, but like that's who we are. We like hardcore music about the dog named Boomer and barking in the background. Like that's who we are. Snoop stuff is cool, but that's LA shit.
Yeah.
That's some smooth stuff over, Isley samples. No. I want that Swizz beat 2-note sample. Like that's New York City basketball right there. And I feel that when it comes to DMX. Like
Yonkers.
I love Snoop like everyone else, but I mean, come on, it's DMX. Let's go.
I mean, X is great. I'm happy to have X as one of New York City's greatest ambassadors. But this is some Marcus Morris dogs. I'm a dog, like.
What the deal?
I mean,
What?
like, what is gonna break the culture of this? Maybe nothing, because New York. I just watched that documentary about all these mobsters. Like, we eat this stuff up as New Yorkers, and it would be nice to like take advantage of our star in the waiting in Mitchell Robinson, but like he's a finesse guy, man. He's gonna end up dominating on another team, and yeah, it's this culture that we somehow can't shake of like Nas CDs and Tom Thibodeau.
Yeah, it's like I don't even want to apply what Thibodeau will do going forward.
I don't care about basketball at all here. Thibodeau is kind of a net neutral.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like maybe Thibodeau is like, you know what? I've learned the error of my ways. I want my teams to shoot a zillion threes. Like, okay, cool. People adapt. He's been out of the league. He's been hanging around with like the Rockets and stuff. Okay, he's changed his mind.
Yeah.
Done. Like, cool. He could be 100% malleable. He loves basketball. He thinks about it. Maybe he's looked at the way that the league has changed and said, I'm going to flip it up.
Yeah.
Cool. But when the Knicks decided to make changes, we thought it was going to be different. Maybe you didn't. But there was the perception that the Knicks were going to do things the right way. They're going to bring in professionals. And that's kind of what they've done, but in a very Knicksian way.
Yeah.
They've hired more or less like old guys from other teams, basketball lifers, World Wide West, Leon Rose, who came to prominence.
Yeah, World Wide West is in the old guard now, too.
Yeah, and, Allen Iverson's guy was Leon Rose. These are guys who are from the 90s.
Yeah.
These are guys who are from the early 2000s. Thibs is another one. They just will not bring in young guys.
No.
And this is what they've done. And I don't dislike Thibs in particular, but it is emblematic of the fact that not much seems to have changed in the Knicks front office. It actually seems more obscured than ever. Who's actually doing things? Who's making decisions? Is Leon Rose the GM? Or is it the other guys that they've hired beneath them? It's all very opaque and seemingly in a fairly intentional way. Like, is it still Steve Mills?
It's just the church, and they operate on hope and belief rather than the opposite, which may be like efficiency statistics, and that's fine. I think there has to be one has to inform the other. They just concentrate on the idea of hope, and I bristle against the popular Knicks sentiment, if it is the popular Knicks sentiment, which is like they just do the same things over and over. I'm like, well, they don't. If you pay attention, like they had Donnie Walsh, they tanked successfully to try to get Zion. They just didn't get Zion. So it's like, I'm frustrated that they're going to get a 4 to 8 pick probably this year. But like they tried last year. They had the ping pong balls for John Morant, and I always say this, if we got Zion, or if the Knicks got Zion or John Morant, we wouldn't be talking about, like, here we go again. It's like a familiar tune that Knicks fans sing when something happens. I'm like, opt out of the coach. opt out of whatever coaching decision they make. He or she is inconsequential here. The consequence lies in the draft and how they spend that salary cap. Do not pay attention to the coach.
I think that's true. I'm more saying that they do the same things in terms of focusing on being immediately okay. That always seems to be a priority. Now, that doesn't mean they don't pull the plug at the end of the season and tank because the team's bad anyway. But they never use their cap space particularly wisely. They never, when they've tried to find players who slip through the cracks in the same way that teams like Houston and Philadelphia and Brooklyn and the Spurs often do, they kind of do it half-assed and then give up on it. That's just sort of how they do things. And I do agree with you that they've done different tactics. Phil Jackson, to me, was a good idea to find someone who is just going to run things.
Yikes.
Just wasn't the right guy.
Yeah.
But I think that idea of saying, let's get someone who knows what they're doing and put them in charge and everyone else shut the fuck up, was the right approach. What they're doing now with this sort of porridge of executives, who does what? Who makes the decisions? Who has final say-so in the Knicks front office? Because if you don't know who it is, then this whole operation is just people covering their own ass.
Which is fine, and we've seen success in that sense. And I catch myself here because it always follows LeBron James. Like we saw Dan Gilbert win a championship and have many successful years. We see Rob Pelinka in LA, who is easily on the level of James Dolan as a basketball executive, in my opinion, have success because LeBron James helped him. And I think a lot comes down to ping pong balls always. And, the energy we have for the Knicks allegedly doing the same things over and over, like when they win 3 out of 5 games in the middle of the season, that's when we should be mad because it's just math. Like, it doesn't help us. That might not produce the fruit that we think it will, but you got to be in the orchard. You can't just look at a picture of fruit and be like, that's what we're going to get.
Well, right. I mean, tanking and being really bad and getting lucky in the draft is not, obviously it is important in terms of getting elite talent. Like, it makes an enormous difference. If you had John Morant instead of RJ Barrett, or you had Zion, we'd be talking about the team differently. That's true. But it is also, generally speaking, the other stuff you do along the way. Because there aren't that many players who can shift the direction of your franchise who come into the league every year. If you get one of those guys, it's a major leg up. But otherwise, you have to do the small stuff, and the Knicks won't do it.
Well,
Either they don't respect it, they don't like it, they don't want to do it, they don't know how to do it. They don't do any of the small stuff. They refuse.
90% agree. But the 10%, just for the sake of a discussion, is the team, their roster now, aside from the Portai and the Morai, does not look like a classic Knicks team. They have drafted rookies and kept them. It's full of young kids under 23. And to me, that is the small stuff that maybe didn't pan out. They had bad picks. Kevin Knox is still a good pick. He didn't pan out. I think he's going to still be a productive NBA player at some point. He's on the level of like Lauri Markkanen to me, who has been like solved. And it's not like Lauri Markkanen would help this team any. And Frank Ntilikina, he might be a backup. But like them sticking to these kids up until now is not Knicksian. And we seem to be blaming them for the spots where they are making, Nas albums. But then they're like it's not what we're actually listening to. Because if you look at the roster, it's full of maybe half hits. Like Mitchell Robinson is a hit. He might be the best player out of the draft the Knicks have ever gotten after 96. I find it hard to be mad at them because they are sticking to the young guys.
That's true. They have not, dumped their lottery picks
yet
from the last few years. That's true.
Yeah.
I agree. They also haven't really played them that much.
Yeah, I don't care that Mitch didn't play this year as much they benched him inexplicably a bit. To me, I know what he is. He's awesome. He's injury prone. He's foul prone. Sit him. I just want to wait to use him when it counts. To me, oddly, he's a proven commodity, so he doesn't have to like get his chops. You can just insert him and he'll dominate. RJ Barrett needs reps, but I don't know. I'm not with that Thibodeau school that these guys need to play themselves into game shape if like like 6 or 7 minutes a night makes that difference. They're still playing.
I think the fundamental problem here goes back to the relegation discussion. Because this team does not have talent to win.
No.
Absolutely not, because they don't win, and they haven't won.
No, they're not good players.
They're not good, and I love Mitch. I think Mitch is a beacon of hope. He can anchor a defense. He can be a uniquely efficient scorer on modest volume.
He's a piece. He's a piece.
He was the most efficient scorer in the history of the NBA this year.
Yeah.
In the history of the NBA at 21 years old on a team that was using him incorrectly.
Even with an eye test, you watch him on the court, you're like, what the hell is this guy? I'm like, he's really good is what he is.
Highest field goal percentage in NBA history. Highest effective field goal percentage in NBA history. Highest offensive rating in NBA history.
Yeah.
Highest true shooting percentage in NBA history.
Surrounded by trash.
So, yeah, he is a unique figure in this otherwise carousel of garbage. But you look at that team and you say, okay, you won 21 games. What if we get Thibs in here? Well, what are you going to do? What's the plan? I know some of these guys come off the books. You know, you can just not pay them because they were on 2-year deals with an opt-out. Sure, you can free up some money, but who are you going to go get? Are you going to trade? Like, people like, we could trade. Well, what do you got to trade? You have Mitchell Robinson in your pick. That's the valuable things you have to trade. You don't have anything else to trade. Randall does not have any value to trade.
No, but he's movable, but you're not going to get anything for Randall.
You could free up his cap space,
Yeah.
most likely, but you still might have to attach a pick to it, depending on who wants him. He's not a bad player, though.
Yeah, he's not the problem. Portis is not the problem. These guys, like, it's a misdirection. These veterans that are super boring, it's not the problem. The problem is the Knicks haven't hit on a rookie. And we have good draft picks. The Knicks have good draft picks, and that's where their value is. If they turn a future pick and this current pick into LaMelo Ball, let's do it. I mean, you keep on bringing this up. Zach LaVine, that might be a wise use of that pick. I think he's a good player. I think he's young enough, and he may not fit with the Bulls. That intrigues me a little bit.
I think LaVine is a solid offensive player. I like him quite a bit. Mm-hmm. He's still pretty young. He recovered from his knee injury, seems to be as good as ever. He's become a very good three-point shooter. I think he was in the maybe like top 10 in terms of three-pointers made this season.
He has star potential. I think he works.
He's a prom king, but he's gotten better.
Yeah.
He is a legitimately good offensive player. Not great. He's not as good as, say, Devin Booker or Bradley Beal, two other guys who don't play much defense. Mm-hmm. Because LaVine, if you try to get him to create for other people, he turns the ball over rampantly. That's like an issue with him. Right. But again, I'm a fan of LaVine. Mm-hmm. But you look at the rest of that team, you can let Portis walk, you can let Taj Gibson walk, and that opens up $25 million right there. You know, your guy Theo Pinson, sure, let him walk. Whatever. There are ways to open up a lot of money. Wayne Ellington, let him walk. Cool, we got max cap again.
Yeah. The Knicks are in a good position.
Well, no, because they only have Mitchell Robinson and they have a draft pick that we don't know where it'll fall. They have nothing. They're in awful position.
No, I think it's a good job. I think the Knicks GM job is tasty. We've talked about this. Leon Rose inherited not the worst job in the NBA. There's like at least 10 teams with worse situations.
Well, yes, because it's a blank canvas.
Yeah,
there's Mitchell Robinson. You're not in any salary cap hell.
All the picks.
And you have your picks and a couple of ones from Dallas that aren't going to be great, but they still exist.
That's a lot. I mean, that's a lot more than a normal Knicks situation, right?
I think we're in agreement on this. I'm saying they have nothing, but that's not as bad as being in a place where you are in the hole. It's not like when Sean Marks or Hinkie took over, respectively, Brooklyn or Philly. Those teams owed picks. Those teams were up shit creek and in the worst position in the league.
Yeah.
Knicks just don't exist. There's not a team there.
Yeah.
You have open cap space because you don't have players.
Yeah, I love that, though, because that could, I've only said this recently for this reason. I think the Knicks are 2 or 20 years away from relevancy, getting back into the NBA. It could happen in 2 years or 200. But having a blank slate, like you say, gives us the space to say that. The Knicks have always been saddled with Howard Isley, Shannon Anderson, contracts, Allen Houston. This is the reality of the Knicks that I always knew, but not anymore. And of course, it takes some savvy to create something from nothing. Something does not arrive from nothing. You have to do the correct things. But sometimes inaction will help you. And the NBA is set up in a way where inaction could help the Knicks here. Just pick the best player, don't care about wins. Pick the best player, don't care about wins, and see how it goes.
I mean, the blank slate thing is intriguing because someone who is good at their job can construct something upon it. But if you look at the other teams who are lousy in the league, the Knicks are not really in better position than any of them, except for the fact that they're not screwed. I think Cleveland is in really lousy shape.
Sacramento's in lousy shape.
But Sacramento has some good players. Like, they could strip it down and get rid of people.
I don't want Marvin Bagley. I mean...
But I just mean I don't want him either. I just mean, Fox is a good player.
The Knicks can't do anything with Fox. Neither can Sacramento. You know what I mean? Like, this is what I'm talking about. It's like, I guess there's a temptation or an appeal to expectation versus reality. And De'Aaron Fox is an awesome player. I love that guy. But, like, he's not going to do anything on the Knicks or the Kings ever.
I mean, I do not like the Kings, to be sure. Like, I'm not a fan. And I would probably take the Knicks situation just because I would not want to be paying Harrison Barnes. And, I think Buddy is a decent player.
Yeah.
Pretty good offensive player, but I wouldn't really want to be paying him what they're paying him either.
I don't want Orlando's roster. I don't want the Wizards roster. We veer into purgatory, right?
I would take Orlando over them for sure. I would take the Wizards over them for sure.
But there's no chance that Orlando roster is not going to win a championship ever.
No,
they're going to get number 10 picks, right?
But you could strip it down for more than what the Knicks have immediately. That's what I'm saying. The Knicks just don't have anything. It's not saying Orlando is going to build this into, into a contender. It's more saying if Orlando said we're starting from scratch, you could get more for their players than the Knicks currently have. That's what I mean.
But we have to talk about inventory at this point, right? Because unless LeBron James or Steph Curry go to Orlando, they can probably turn Aaron Gordon into Donovan Mitchell. I don't know. Who would you like? Chris Paul and Donovan Mitchell?
I'm more saying if you just said, we're going to unload our team into draft picks and we're going to keep Jonathan Isaac.
Yeah.
And you say, okay, so let's compare the Knicks picks and assets to what Orlando would get from getting rid of Terrence Ross, Fournier, Mo Bamba, Aaron Gordon, Vucevic, etc. To me, there's no comparison if you were going to take them apart. But if you're going to let Orlando live its life and go to fruition, they're not going to end up a championship team.
I think we're playing two different slot machines, right? I'm playing one that only has a jackpot, and you're playing one that yields rewards on a scale. Because, and this is a little too polarizing, but I believe certain teams have hit the jackpot, the Sixers being one of them, Milwaukee, LA. Unless you're one of those teams, I don't want to be stuck hustling an Aaron Gordon to try to get a player slightly better than him. And I'll be happy with Aaron Gordon on the Knicks, whatever. But I love the idea that the Knicks still have a coin for this jackpot game.
Right, but I'm saying you don't have to let Orlando go to its ultimate fruition as
No,
a
but
sixth
flipping them doesn't yield you Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid. It just doesn't happen.
No, I'm saying unload all those guys for draft picks and you're in better position than the Knicks are.
Oh, but first they have to do that, and those draft picks have to be good. And who's going to give you an unprotected pick for Aaron Gordon? He doesn't have that street value.
I don't know. I just think a teardown in a lot of these places would get you more than what the Knicks have, which is
Maybe.
basically
Yeah.
the Knicks don't have anything. That's what I'm saying. Is like
But they have a
to look
bad
at-
team in picks, which is something, right?
Yeah, but every bad team has a bad team in picks.
Well, what if you're kind of good with picks like Orlando?
Yeah, you
I
could
just don't love that.
I just mean to look at the Knicks and say they have something here is just not true. They have one potential pick and they have Mitchell Robinson. That's all they have. If you looked at a team
I
like,
love that though.
but you just like it because of the potential. I'm saying if you looked at Chicago and you're like, well, Levine is worth more than anything the Knicks have, and they're going to get a very similar pick because they have virtually the same record. So, who's in a better position?
There was 4 teams maybe that had a chance at Zion Williamson. I'll take it.
I mean, I get what you're saying. I just can't look at what the Knicks have and say this is worth anything.
That's fine. I mean, we talk about purgatory a lot in like the team in Boston is in purgatory, I think. The Wizards kind of got out of it a little, but might step right back into it depending on what contracts they give out in the future. A lot of teams are stuck. Like Denver's not stuck. I'd love to have that roster, but San Antonio's
I don't really know who's stuck other than I don't know. Washington. I mean, the Sixers are stuck, but they have 2 supremely talented guys. Like the Wizards,
they have won the jackpot, so they have a chance, right?
Yeah, I just don't think that many teams are bad, but have a lot of guys under crazy contracts. I guess that's what I'm getting at.
That's fair. I mean,
because contracts aren't that long these days. So if you sign someone to like a 4-year deal when you think you're going to be competitive, and then your team ends up stinking, you're only 2 years away from getting out of that contract.
Yeah, I think the NBA, you're 2 years away from almost anything.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of where I'm at. Is like, you don't have to see any of these things through. I guess I would say Charlotte is in a worse position though than the Knicks
for sure, and
because they owe money and they don't have anyone.
And an interesting thing that I love thinking about that we always bring up is a lot of these players who play on these teams that are bad to good kind of circulate only through teams that are bad and good. They're kind of stuck in this atmosphere because of contracts, because of available cap space, and it's tough to step up into another tier when you're like Bradley Beal. Like, can the Brooklyn Nets give enough and retain their 2 stars for Beal? Maybe, but he would be like kind of an exception. You don't see many of those trades.
Yeah, there are dudes who maybe they're Zellers. Maybe they're
A Zella.
Hernan Gomez's.
Hernan Gomez.
But guys who Biyombo is definitely one. Like Charlotte's packed with these dudes.
Yeah.
Just packed.
Batum. Yeah, Batum maybe can get on a winner now because he has no street value.
But there's some of those guys. Portis is one. They are good enough to play on bad teams, not good enough to be an answer on a contender for what they command on the market. Like Portis could be someone's backup power forward, but the Knicks are willing to pay him $15 million a year, which no contender would ever dream of doing because they're paying someone a lot better that money or more.
Marvin Bagley is going to have a tough time joining a successful team in his next contract just because of the money he's going to command. He's shown enough that he will get paid, but he also shown enough where he's a risk. Like, I think he's going to exist in a in a tier that probably prevents him from having a chance to being on a great team.
there's an interesting sort of paradigm here between the god Nerlens Noel and his once understudy Richaun Holmes. Because Nerlens has never gotten a big contract, and he's been the backup center on pretty good teams.
Yeah.
I mean, Dallas did not end up being good while he was there, but they were intending on being pretty good until they tanked. But OKC, Nerlens is as good as advertised.
He's cheap, inexplicably cheap.
We always talk about the Nerlens conundrum of why he doesn't get paid, and you look at him, and every year, he would have been, I think he might have been like the second most efficient player in history after Mitchell Robinson. Like they're fairly similar in that way. But yeah. Nerlens became a good foul shooter. His efficiency went through the roof when he started playing with Chris Paul. His defensive metrics are still there. According to some of those Beantown Media Mafia advanced metrics, Nerlens is like a top 18 player in the league, and he makes like a buck and change. But Holmes went and got a fairly sizable contract.
He did. He got
to
paid.
Go play in Sacramento.
Mr. Lemon Pepper over here.
But it's unlikely that a contender would have ever paid Richaun Holmes that money.
Exactly. Yeah. It's tricky, and that's why I want to kind of abolish the salary cap. I just think if a team wants Richaun Holmes, they should be able to pay him his market value. He shouldn't be prevented from succeeding in that way. Like, he should have a chance at a championship.
The only ethical organization out there is the Sacramento Kings. They will give you what no one else will. They will give you your market value. Harrison Barnes, max, baby. Oh, I'm sorry, Richaun Holmes. We're really impressed by what you've done. Yeah. We'll pay you a lot. Dedmon? Absolutely. We'll sign both you guys. It's cool. You were under Hinkie. Great.
Yeah.
You love it. We'll pay you more than anyone else in the entire NBA.
Yeah.
Awesome.
The Kings are Medicare and the Knicks are Medicaid, and the Knicks are Medicare. They are a retirement destination. Their Social Security.
The Knicks definitely did that, though. No one was going to pay Randall that money. No one was going to pay Portis that money. No one was going to pay Taj Gibson that money. And the Knicks, we will outbid everyone.
It's Social
for
Security.
These players.
Yeah. Yeah. You always have a chance to get paid by the Knicks for sure if you just show some bark in your woof. I don't know.
Well, before we exit this perfect pod, we should talk a little bit about what we've seen in the bubble so far.
So many burgers, stacks and stacks.
There's a lot of burgers. Thus far, no COVID cases amongst people who tested negative when they got there, I believe. Mm-hmm. But we have had some guys like Trez and Zion and Patrick Beverly.
Austin Rivers left. He's for an emergency.
Yeah, some players leaving, and then they'll have to do quarantine again. So we'll see how this happens. And, all systems go thus far, but on one hand, the risk was always going to be from other people who are coming in and out from Florida as well. And that has not subsided as a way to jeopardize the sanctity of the bubble. Yeah. So we'll see. But thus far, it's up and running.
Let's talk about hoops. What have you seen hoops-wise?
Well, first of all, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the aesthetics themselves.
Cookie's the most influential basketball podcast, by the way. Called it. Mm-hmm. They're going to have live fans streaming in, cheering, pumped through the system in little squares in back of every basket, as predicted on this podcast.
And point guard, Jokic.
that too. Point yoke.
But I would say it does feel a little sterile, as it would in a pandemic bubble. You don't have the fans, you don't have the noise. The court itself, they have some interesting camera angles. It is weird because it feels kind of like Summer League.
Yeah, for sure. The lighting.
It's the lighting. It doesn't look like a stadium. It's really quiet when guys are taking foul shots. I saw J.J. Redick say that he felt that was the biggest difference. That kind of was surreal, just having silence. Mm-hmm. But so far, I got to say, these guys are so good at basketball that to not play for months on end, and to go back out there, I gotta say, me going back out there after 4 months wasn't as crisp as these NBA guys look.
That's a good point, because I watched a couple of these games, and maybe it's like the distillation of the experience, but without thinking about like the fans and having it different lighting and looking like a practice court, it occurred to me how good these guys are. I'm just like, oh, this isn't the stuff we've seen like the basketball tournament. Like, these guys are the best at what they do, and you can see even when like the last guy on the bench comes on in garbage minutes during preseason for the preseason bub. It's like, oh, you're not of the same quality because you've distilled this image so far that you can identify kind of greatness and strengths, Like, I don't know. I love Ben Simmons, obviously. Watching him play, I'm like, this guy is very, very good. He's the best player on the court at any moment.
When you see the sort of alternative angles and people's camera phones, and you watch NBA action in the same way you would digest someone on a camera phone at the playground or at open gym, or when we look at a video clip of a high school player and you're watching their highlights. When you watch the NBA through a similar lens to that, the quality is just so intense, where you see how fast the players are and how big they are and how quick
small the court is.
Yeah, how quickly they have to release shots after the ball is moved so rapidly, and how fast someone is getting there. It's just stunning when you compare it to like the versions of basketball that we are accustomed to seeing through those same kind of camera angles and sources of equipment.
And it's also the mental part too. These guys, like, they give you some of these open looks, and like when we're surrounded by crowd noise and the fanfare of a normal game, we can't really see this, but when it's so quiet and you just have these 10 guys on the court, I'm like, oh, he's baiting him. He's been baiting him for the last 3 possessions. It's just like, it's really cool to see, like, basically a magnifying glass into these games.
Yeah, they're just so remarkably good at basketball, even coming off of this delay.
Yeah.
When people think about basketball, self included, sometimes you view it through the context of your own experiences, right? So you're like, well, yeah, when I put someone in the post and we kind of spread out on the court, yeah, you can put 4 shooters around them.
Yeah.
But you can't do that in the NBA because they're not normal. They are huge with like incredibly lengthy wingspans. They move really fast. They are disciplined. They move as a unit that is designed to stop you from doing what you want to do.
Yep.
It's like a different sport. And when people look at it and try to think about what they would do or their experiences, it's just not the same thing.
And I don't prefer this version. Maybe it's just because of the doom and gloom, the cloud that surrounds this entire experience. I prefer the fanfare, like the family-friendly fanfare of a normal game. But this is a cool reprieve from that, right? Like, it's nice to see it in a different light.
I think it's interesting, if nothing else. I have the same skepticism you do towards this entire endeavor. I think it was tone deaf. I'm not sure that outside of the specific efforts of the players who are the ones doing the heavy lifting, there is going to be more emphasis on Black Lives Matter. But the players are doing their thing. They're going out there and they're making sure that their voices are heard. Like, this is not the NBA, it's the players.
Yeah, and me being a lifelong NBA fan and a proud American, when they kneel, man, I'm out. They lost another customer as far as I'm concerned.
The NBA will put up some signs that say Black Lives Matter, but it's LeBron saying, let's talk about Breonna Taylor. That's on him. And apparently his organization has also been working to get money that's owed from potential voters in Florida paid back to the government so that they can have their rights as American citizens. So, like, LeBron's just crushing it.
Yeah, he's awesome. I'm a big fan. in every way. But like, I watched a WNBA game today, and the Seattle Storm left the court, and their player Breonna Stewart came back and had like Breonna Taylor like on her jersey. And I thought, like these moments, I think are the various degrees of powerful, but I'm into it. And if there's a context and a stage, like I'm waiting to see what LeBron does every game, like how he's going to behave and what he's going to tell us, because he's a leader, and I'm interested to hear his opinion.
One thing that was a nice outcome that's unrelated to politics was, when I was shooting around at the court, there were all these little kids, and they were putting up jumpers, and they were all going 1 for 2 and saying Ben Simmons every time they launched. It's just really iconic.
I love that, man. Wait, are you making that up?
Yeah, I'm making that up.
Come on.
No one else was dumb enough to be out there today.
Yeah, man, be careful. Make sure you hydrate, man. It's a scorcher out there.
But, yeah, shout out to Ben Simmons for making 2 threes, or making 1 of 2 threes. The defenses are so forthright now.
It's so clear that the people who hate on Ben Simmons don't care about him shooting threes. It's just like, as soon as he hit that shot, I was following on Twitter, it was just like, well, whatever, do it in a game. It doesn't matter. He still sucks. And I'm like, oh, you don't care about this at all. Like,
that's why Sixers fans buying into it are demented. Because it's fake.
Yeah.
It's just criticism that people are making up a fake story. It's Boston fans. It's whoever. It's just the internet talking shit. And Sixers fans like, yeah, you're right. It is a big issue. Oh my God, it really matters. Like it doesn't matter at all. Yeah. And the irony here is that we've now conceded after years that he is in fact a power forward. And we're still talking about a power forward shooting threes? Okay, well, let's open it up to Bam Adebayo, a power forward who doesn't shoot any threes. Mm-hmm. Like, who fucking cares, man? It's so weird. Like, if Ben Simmons can learn to shoot threes at an adequate level, that's great. Good. That's another weapon in his toolbox. As far as I'm concerned, there has never been an indication from his free throw shooting, from his complete lack of three-pointers, from his mid-range jumpers, that he will be a good three-point shooter up until now. Maybe he's worked on enough that he can start making those shots at a clip of a points per possession that makes it a valuable shot as opposed to not taking that three. But, like, who cares about the rest? We've just said the guy's a power forward. I don't get it. And again, it's the Sixers fans who bother me. I don't care about the BMM chatting about Simmons. Whatever, that's their job.
Yeah,
that's what they do.
A dog barks. Totally.
But Sixers fans buying into this is like such sucker shit. It's like falling victim to a hoax, and like, it's like.
Well, it's like.
I can't even think of a good example.
I think this is. I always am interested in arguments about authenticity, and it always loses me right away. But when someone says, I find this to be authentic or inauthentic, I'm like, oh, go on. This is kind of a cool discussion. And it always falls apart because I guess I side on authenticity not existing as a concept or premise, because it depends on where your starting point is, and it's too subjective to frame. And I think it's an easy jingle to get stuck in your head to think of Ben Simmons as an inauthentic star, when in fact that whole premise is suspect to me.
Yeah, I obviously I agree. Like, yeah. I do not understand the obsession. It only strikes me as a refrain.
Yeah, and
it's something to say. I just am. It's really wild that Jason Tatum put up 12 points on 36% shooting in the second round of the playoffs last year, and they've responded to that by going on an all-out campaign to say that he is a top 5 player, despite the fact that he clearly is not. Well, like, that's some cool fan shit.
Well,
to have a guy choke, to a guy shit the bed in the playoffs, and your response is to say that this guy's the best player in the NBA. That's awesome.
But you got to respect what Jason Tatum does well. And what he does well is he turns from a borderline player to an all-star, maybe a top 5 player without playing a single minute in a game. Like, show me another player who does that. Maybe Shake Milton a little bit, who's now maybe an all-star. I don't know.
But seriously wild that Boston fans and the Boston media took a guy who embarrassed himself in the second round of the playoffs. First round, Jay.
Yeah.
He was horrible in a series that they lost and was celebrated, not even mentioned as being a culprit. It was all, Kyrie did it. Drive him out of town.
Ooh.
They were loyal to their young guy. They boosted him up. They pretended that he was a superstar. Sixers fans, Sixers media, just shat on Ben Simmons, despite the fact that he was the only guy locking down Kawhi Leonard basically in the league that entire postseason.
Yeah, I'm not so excited about the reach of the tiny green hand. It's reached all the way to Philly. But, like the tiny green hand behaves like the guy that you're playing pickup with who just chucks shots up. Like, it's their job. I'm like, well, if you pass it to him, he's going to chuck. So when I hear, like, tune in and listen to us figure out if Jason Tatum is a top 5 player, I'm like, well, they're just chucking shots. But it's...
Yeah, because the Sixers could have just ignored it. Sixers fans could have ignored it. Sixers media could have ignored it. But they don't generate sports stories.
Right.
They respond to them.
Right.
Like the sports media does not come out of Philly.
No.
It comes out of Boston. It comes out of Boston acolytes. It comes out of Boston enthusiasts.
Yeah.
Boston natives. And they could not resist the siren call of the little green hand.
Yo, this is going to be fun, man. I can't wait till the Sixers play Boston. I'm going to really enjoy that.
Very good.
I wish we could go to a bar and have a beer and watch this game at night. But
Instead it'll be at like 3 p.m.
I guess we could
and
Skype.
not at a bar.
We could FaceTime, I guess.
Well, we'll just have to keep dropping perfect pods until then.
It was a perfect emergency pod.
Emergency pod, as Patreon subscribers are getting right now.
Cookies.
Cookies.
I love cookies. I love cookies. I love cookies. I love cookies.